Good afternoon. Yesterday at the G20, my fellow leaders and I directly confronted the Russian foreign minister with the illegality and brutality of his country's war in Ukraine. Barely 12 hours later, more than 80 Russian missiles rained down on Western Ukraine, killing civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure. While other world leaders were working together to tackle the greatest challenges our people face, Putin was launching indiscriminate attacks on civilians in Ukraine. In the wake of these attacks, today we held an urgent meeting of allies to underscore our solidarity with Ukraine and Poland. I also spoke to Polish President Duda this morning to offer my wholehearted support and assurance that the United Kingdom stands steadfastly behind him and his people at this worrying time. We should all be clear, none of this would be happening if it weren't for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is the cruel and unrelenting reality of Putin's war. As long as it goes on, it poses a threat to our security and that of our allies. And as long as it goes on, it will continue to devastate the global economy. 2/3 of G20 members are currently experiencing inflation rates over 7%. And the IMF predicts 1/3 of the world's economy will be in recession this year or next. At a time when countries are tentatively emerging from the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic, households across the world have been hit by punishing price rises and are facing an uncertain future. When the G20 was established, it was with the acknowledgement that economic shocks are inherently global. Responding to them requires coordination and cooperation between the world's largest economies. We have come together over the years, despite our political differences, in recognition of the economic importance of this forum. But this year in particular, as last night's events laid bare, the challenges we face are utterly political. The persistent threat to our security and global economic asphyxiation has been driven by the actions of the one man unwilling to be at this summit, Vladimir Putin. There is not a single person in the world who hasn't felt the impact of Putin's war. Global food markets have been severely disrupted by his attempts to choke off Ukrainian grain supply. There has been an 8-fold increase in global energy prices thanks to Russia turning off their gas taps. And the economic aftershocks of Putin's casual disregard for human life will ripple around the world for years to come. But in Indonesia this week, the rest of the G20 have refused to let Russia's grandstanding and hollow excuse-making undermine this important opportunity to make life easier for our people. Economic stability and confidence are at the heart of the government's agenda. That means being a constructive and reliable member to the international community, using our influence to help keep global prices down and create the conditions that will help the United Kingdom and other global economies return to growth. At this summit, G20 partners have come together to strengthen our international economic foundations, making ambitious commitments to help the most vulnerable, reduce global reliance on Russian fossil fuels in favour of greener, more secure alternatives, and drive a better future where no country has the power to devastate the global economy. I'd like to thank the Indonesian President Jokowi for the role he has played in hosting these discussions and leading the G20 at this challenging time. Tomorrow, the Chancellor will build on these international foundations when he makes the autumn statement, outlining his plan to get the country on a positive trajectory, put the public finances on the right footing, and get debt falling. By promoting free markets, forging strong international relationships, and prioritising our stability and security, we will build a global platform for the United Kingdom to thrive, giving the people of our country the certainty that they need. Thank you. We'll take some questions from the press, I think starting with Chris from the BBC. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. To be clear, are you disputing what we've heard from President Biden? He said it's unlikely that the explosion in Poland was caused by a missile that was fired from Russia. I wonder what UK intelligence reports are saying and what you've heard from them. And if I may, what do you say to people today seeing this news who are deeply worried that a moment like this, even if not this particular incident, could see the UK drawn into a war with Russia?
Thank you, Chris. Well, this is something that we discussed this morning at our meeting of allies, and I think what we all agreed this morning was that it was important for our teams to establish the facts, and that is exactly what is happening as we speak. There are teams on the ground involving not just the Poles, but also the Ukrainians, Americans, and others. I think all of us want to get to the bottom of what happened, and it's right that we let that process conclude. But to your second point, and taking a step back, the reason we're even having this conversation is because yesterday Russia rained down over 80 missile strikes on the Ukrainians, on civilian infrastructure, electricity, water, and such like. That's why we're having this conversation, and we can't lose sight of that fact. But we will get to the bottom of what happened, and that's what the teams are doing as we speak. Anushka, ITV.
Prime Minister, when you were woken up at 5 a.m. this morning and told about this missile getting as far as Poland, did it bring home to you how quickly this war could escalate?
Yeah, that's why one of the first things I did this morning after receiving the news was to call President Duda of Poland. Poland is a staunch ally of the United Kingdom, and I wanted to give him my personal reassurance and commitment that we stand steadfast with him and his people at this time. We're there to help them with what they need and to express my sympathies for the loss of life that his country have experienced. But it does, as I was saying to Chris, just put in stark reality what happened yesterday. And I also spoke to President Zelensky earlier today with Prime Minister Trudeau, where he described what was going on in his country yesterday, and it's awful to hear. As I said, over 80 missile strikes targeting civilian infrastructure with the loss of civilian life. That's what's happening. And by the way, that was happening at a time when the G20 was gathered trying to find resolution to some of the world's challenges, and at the same time, Putin was raining down indiscriminately that volume of missile attacks. I think it shows utter contempt for the international rules-based system, and that's why it was right that together with allies, we called out his illegal and barbaric war strongly at the sessions that we had. Ryan, where are you? Ryan, hi.
Prime Minister, in one interview yesterday, you said illegal migration was your #1 challenge. In a separate interview, you said inflation was your #1 challenge. Can I ask you, ahead of the autumn statement where millions of people may be worse off, what is your #1 challenge?
Yeah, well, look, my absolute #1 priority is making sure that we deal with the economic situation that we face at home. With more news of inflation today, it's the #1 thing that's on people's minds. It's the thing that's causing most anxiety. Opening up bills, seeing the emails come in with rising prices, and that's why it's right that we grip it. And tomorrow the Chancellor will set out a plan that will enable us to do that. I think the first thing to say about that is that it's a global challenge, and I've been having lots of conversations with my fellow leaders at this summit. You heard what I said about some of the statistics from the IMF about the breadth of this challenge across the world. That's caused by the legacy of COVID, it's caused by what Putin is doing on energy prices, but that doesn't make it any easier, which is why we need to take decisive action at home to get our borrowing and debt on a sustainable trajectory. We'll do that because that will help us tackle inflation. It will help us cut the costs of things. It will help us limit the increase in mortgage rates. And once we have that stable foundation, which the Chancellor will provide tomorrow, I'm confident that we can move forward as a country and we can look forward to a brighter future and build on that foundation to provide jobs and opportunity and prosperity around the country. But we need to get a grip of inflation first. We need to have that strong foundation. We're not alone, as I said, in approaching the problem that way. Actually, the communique that was released today by the G20 talked about the need for long-term fiscal sustainability deliberately in the context of high inflation that we're seeing around the world, and that's why it's right that we grip it. But yes, the next priority alongside that has been illegal migration. It's been the thing that I've spent most of my time on, outside of preparing for the autumn statement and working with the Chancellor to do that. I think that is a priority for the British people, and it's something that they have my commitment I will address. You've seen the early fruits of that work with the new deal we have with the French, and that came after conversations I had with President Macron, both on the phone and in person when we were in Egypt together, but that's not the end. That's the start of greater cooperation, and it's just one of a suite of measures that we will have to take to reduce the number of illegal migrants coming to the UK, but I'm determined to do that, and I'm sure that we can deliver it over time. Ben, well, there you are.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Two quick ones. One on the autumn statement. It's going to get a lot tougher for a lot of people in the country with what's coming tomorrow, tax rises, spending cuts. Can you just explain to the British public why they need to accept what's coming? And secondly, you talked to Joe Biden today. It sounds like you didn't explicitly talk about a US free trade deal. Have you given up hopes of a US free trade deal before the next election?
Great. I think what I'd say to people watching at home is, we were just discussing actually to Ryan's question, what's people's number one anxiety at the moment? It's the rising cost of things. It's inflation. That's what's eating into people's living standards. The Chancellor rightly described it as insidious. It makes people poorer. That's what inflation does. And it's the enemy that we need to face down. And I want to make sure that we do that, and we do it as quickly as possible. I want to limit the increase in mortgage rates, because that's also causing anxiety for millions of homeowners across the UK. And given that we're facing these global economic shocks, we are going to have to take some difficult decisions at home to protect ourselves against those and to start getting a grip of inflation, reducing it and limiting the increase in mortgage rates. So that's why we're doing what we're going to have to do tomorrow. But what I would also say to people, they kind of got a glimpse over the summer of what can happen if we don't get these things right, and we want to make sure that we do, and we have stability and confidence in the United Kingdom's economy. But also, I want to tell people that the decisions that we'll be making tomorrow will be based on fairness, they'll be based on compassion, and I am confident that when people see the set of decisions in the round, when the Chancellor has delivered his statement, that they will see that we have strived incredibly hard to deliver fairness, to deliver compassion, and put the UK on a positive economic trajectory. That's what I'm here to do, and that's what I'm confident they will deliver. On trade, we actually had a very good conversation with President Biden on a range of things. We didn't discuss the trade deal in particular, but we did discuss our economic partnership, and both of us acknowledged the fact that actually we are, the United States is our single largest trading partner, and there's a range of economic cooperation that is happening and can continue to happen in the future. We talked about energy, for example, and how we can work together to improve energy security at a time when we're all wanting to have more of that at home. So I'm filled with optimism about our ability to do more trade with the US, to deepen our economic relationship, but as I said, that can happen in lots of different ways, and you'll see that over the coming months and years, I'm sure. Seb from the FT. Well, there you are, Seb. Hi.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The UK's economic woes seem to be particularly acute compared to some of its neighbours and like-minded countries. Do you accept that Brexit in any way is a contributing factor to those issues? And linked to that, the former Environment Secretary, George Eustice, has said the UK's trade deal with Australia is essentially a dud, we gave far too much away for far too little. Will you be looking to renegotiate that, and how do we avoid that in the future?
Well, I think when you're thinking about what the UK's economic situation is, I'd point you back to the comments and the statistics that I made in my opening remarks. 2/3 of the global economy, or G20 members, seeing inflation rates above 7% at the moment. The IMF thinks 1/3 of the global economy either is or will be in recession. That is the global context. That's what's dominated the conversations that I've been having here. And we know why that is. It's the legacy of COVID, and it's, of course, what Putin is doing that is driving up energy and indeed food prices. And you talk to some of my colleagues from Africa and what they're grappling with, they're very cognizant of that. So that's the global economic context, and I think that is what's dominating what's happening. Every country is going to have idiosyncratic things, but those are the overwhelming dominating factors that are leading to the economic challenge that we're facing at the moment. Now, with regard to Australia, look, every trade deal has, there's give and take on both sides. What I'd say to people about the Australia trade deal, it's going to make it easier for young Brits and Australians to go and work and visit each other's countries, which is a positive thing. It's going to reduce the prices of Australian goods in the UK, and it's also going to support over 3 million British jobs which are engaged in exporting to Australia. But what I've said on trade deals more generally is that my approach will be one where we don't sacrifice quality for speed. I want to take the time to get trade deals right, make sure that they work for the UK. I'm confident that we can do that. And indeed, I've been having conversations with other leaders here about deepening our trade partnerships, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, with Australia, with Japan and with Canada, the CPTPP arrangement. I've spoken to all those leaders about our plans to join that free trade area, which are exciting, and I'll be doing that after I leave here as well as the trade deal with India, which we remain committed to. But we need to make sure we get these things right, and that's what I will do. Brilliant. And I think we have one last question from the international press. Laraswati, where are you? From Compass, is that right?
Yes, thank you, Prime Minister. My question is, with the recent increase in geopolitical tensions, how is the UK going to work together with all of your G20 peers to implement today's communique? Thank you.
Thank you. It was an excellent question to end on. I think probably there may have been people who came into this summit with some scepticism about what was possible. And I just think, actually, I'll start by paying enormous tribute to President Jokowi for his leadership in what have not been easy circumstances. But the communique that was released today is substantive, it's comprehensive, it's action-oriented, and it was by no means a short. And I think the President and his team deserve enormous praise for the leadership that they've demonstrated over the year, but especially over the past few days. But your question rightly is about, well, how do we make sure that that's a reality? Well, I think you saw it. I think you saw the spirit of cooperation on display in the meetings that we had, where there was a strong desire to both condemn Putin for the illegal war in Ukraine and express solidarity with the Ukrainians. President Zelensky, I think, powerfully addressed the sessions, but also to work together on all the other challenges that we face, the global economy, making sure that we combat inflation together, making sure that we transition to a greener, more secure energy future, or indeed helping the most vulnerable when it comes to food. And again, credit to the President of Turkey and the United Nations Secretary General for their work on the Black Sea grain deal, where I think there's strong alignment amongst colleagues to make sure that we extend that deal, that we continue to have the supply, not just of food, but of fertilizer, and ensure that Russia doesn't stop that from happening, because there are many countries that are suffering. 2/3 of the wheat from Ukraine goes to developing countries. It's important that we maintain that flow. So look, I think those are some of the things coming out of this summit that I want to make sure we go and focus on and deliver for people. But what I'd also say is, I think there's excitement about India taking the baton. I think Prime Minister Modi made an excellent speech at the close of the summit, and there's a lot of positivity about about all the positive things that have come out of this summit being carried on into India's presidency, and people are looking forward to supporting India in that, and we certainly will play our part in the United Kingdom to make sure that we do that. Perfect. Thank you all very much.